Hi everyone, it's Stephanie here and welcome back. In today's video, we are going to be creating what I'm going to call a sunflower. I know it doesn't look perfectly like one, but I thought that I would use the Cross-Stitch Flower Frame die along with the Shaker Flower and create a big, large sunflower on my card front. So what I want to do first is I want to do some stitching on this. I love the Cross-Stitch Flower Frame because it allows you to create the flower. It layers perfectly over the Shaker Flower die, but it lets you add some stitching as well. So you get a little bit of both worlds. You get the paper crafting and the stitching, and you get to combine them onto one card. So the first thing I'm going to do on my card is I'm going to add some ink to a white cardstock panel. And I'm doing it this way just because I want to have like a really nice, kind of a bright mustardy yellow. And I didn't really have a cardstock color that I wanted to use, so I decided just to use my distress inks. So I'm using mustard seed for the base layer, and then I went in with some fossilized amber just to add a little bit of a deeper color around the outside edge. I then ran this through my die cutting machine, and what I'm left with is the outside of this flower design with all of the stitch holes in it, and then I have an opening in the center, and that's going to allow us to create a shaker part. So we're going to get to that in a little bit, but first we need to do all of the stitching on this flower. So when I do any stitching on my paper crafting projects, I like to use DMC thread, and I usually leave all 6 strands together when I do my stitching. Now for this here, I like to just start on one petal, and I like to start at the top so that I can start my thread and kind of catch it in the back and kind of stitch over top of it, and that just helps to kind of secure it in place. There are a lot of different ways that you can do your stitching patterns. You can do all sorts of different techniques and different things with your stitching, but I usually prefer just to do a basic X pattern and fill all of the holes with that pattern. The only thing I just want to recommend is if you do the basic cross stitch, which is just this X, always keep your threads going in the same direction. It just helps everything to look uniform, and it doesn't make any of the X's kind of look out of place. So I always like to make sure that the bottom part of my X is going in one direction and the top part is going in the other direction, and I do that for every single X that I add to my stitching. Now I'm just going to go ahead and do the first little petal here on this design, and when I finish it I'm going to end at the very bottom X on the bottom row, and that's going to allow me to kind of move over to the next petal without you seeing any of that thread. It'll go nicely behind the little area in between each of the flower petals so that I can continuously stitch the entire flower until I have all of the petals completely stitched. So here's a little look at this first petal, and I just went ahead off camera and did all of the stitching exactly the same way. And now you can see that I have this great flower design and I have this great texture on it from all that stitching that we added. Okay, so now we're going to move on and work on the different parts of the rest of the flower. So I have this other piece here that we're going to layer on the top, and then I have the leaves, the stem, and then the center area that we're going to add to the middle of the flower, and that's where we're going to create the shaker. So because I did inking for the flower portion, I decided that I wanted to do it for the entire card. So I'm going to take some green color inks here and add them to a white cardstock panel. So I added some Mowed Lawn first, which is a really nice, bright, vibrant green. And then I went in with some peeled paint, which is more of a muted green. And I'm going to kind of mix these together, so I really wanted that contrast between the two green colors. I then went in and added some ground espresso to another panel, and that's going to be for the center of the flower. And now I'm going in just straight with the fossilized amber, not any mustard seed. I want this back piece to be super dark in that yellow color, and I'm going to cut out the flower. So now I have all of my different flower pieces cut out, and you can see the great kind of shading and definition we get by using the ink blending on the cardstock versus just cutting these from some colored cardstock. I really like that contrast, so I love to do this anytime I'm doing some kind of a die cut piece together like this. Now for the background, I decided I wanted just a tiny bit of blue in the background. I didn't want it to be super dark. I just want a little hint of a sky in the background. So I took some peacock feathers and I started in the center of my panel, and I just went very light-handed and kind of worked my way out and added that ink onto the panel. Now my plan for the center of the flower, like I mentioned before, is to turn this into a shaker. So I have the circle shaker pouches, which fit perfectly inside both the Shaker Flower die as well as the Cross-Stitch Flower die, so everything layers together perfectly. So to create the shaker, I need to add the shaker pouch inside the opening first, so that's what I'm doing here. I just added some score tape to the back of the flower, and then I just pressed that shaker pouch directly on there. And you can see that the brown piece here that I used to create the center of the flower is going to cover the back, but there's nothing to really adhere it to. It kind of just fits exactly in that opening of the shaker pouch. So what I like to do is I just like to adhere it to a piece of white cardstock and trim around it just to give it a bit of a border. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me somewhere to put my adhesive in order to stick this onto the flower. So I'm just going to take that same score tape and I'm going to go around this whole entire piece and add the adhesive directly to that white piece that we added. Having this on here is going to allow us to stick this onto the back of the flower, but all you're actually going to see when we're finished is the brown area in the center, and we're still going to get that really great stitch detail. Now before we attach everything together, I want to turn this into a shaker, so we need to add some sequins. Now I decided just to go with some basic brown sequins first, and you can see these are a little bit of a different color than the ink color we used on the background. And I really love the contrast between those two colors. I think it just helps the sequins to kind of stand out a little bit, even though we are doing tone on tone. I also added some clear sequins in there as well, and then I just pressed my flower directly onto that background piece, and now I have the flower top completed with all of these great sequins in the center, and everything's tone on tone, so it really gives that look of a sunflower. Now to add the stitching part on, I like to take a liquid glue and just add it on the stitching directly behind each petal. And then I like to just press that down onto the background piece. I just find that this really helps to adhere it on, and I don't have to worry about that flower piece kind of coming off. And everything kind of fits perfectly together there, and that flower layers really nicely in the center. Okay, so now that we have the flower portion completely created, we need to go ahead and start to add all of the pieces to the card and create the flower. So I first put the stem on, and I lifted it up just a bit off the bottom of the card so that it would reach the top of the flower. And then I'm going to cover the bottom area with my first two leaves here, and you're never going to know that the stem didn't actually go to the bottom of the panel. Now for this other leaf here, I couldn't decide what I wanted to do, and I ended up doing the same style as the one I had did at the bottom. I just changed it up and used the darker green color underneath, and then the brighter green for the leaf that has the open areas. I'm going to be layering the panel onto a milk chocolate cardstock, so you can see here it's slightly smaller than my card base, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. And I want to stamp my sentiment on that same brown colored cardstock. So I have the Birdie Brown Greetings Galore sentiment stamp set, and I'm going to stamp out the phrase thinking of you with some Versamark ink. Versamark is just a clear sticky ink that's going to allow me to add this white embossing powder directly on top, and then I'm going to go ahead and heat set that with my heat tool. And now I have my sentiment here, and it's going to kind of stretch across the card and go into that open area that we have between the flower and the leaves at the bottom. And since we have so much detail and dimension going on with the center of the flower and all of the stitching, I decided just to add the sentiment strip directly to the panel. I trimmed off the extra, and then I added the panel to my milk chocolate card base directly on there, no foam adhesive. And then the last thing I'm going to do to finish the card is just add a few green sequins kind of scattered over the sentiment area. I chose to use the green just to give a little bit more green color to the card, since we do have a lot of the brown and yellow already going on, and I liked how they perfectly match the leaves on the flower. And that is going to finish our card. So I hope this gave you some ideas on ways that you can use the Shaker Flower and the Cross-Stitch Flower Frame Dynamics together to create some really fun flower looks. You can definitely change it up depending on the colors you use. So you can do a sunflower like I did, or you can do a completely different flower design. Thanks so much for joining me in today's video. I hope to see you in another one soon. Thanks for watching.